The rain's already started. Let me tell you a story. No rush, no noise, just a calm place to rest your thoughts. But before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button. By the way, what time is it where you are right now? The sound of footsteps at 3 a.m. It started like most strange things do, so softly, you almost don't realize it's happening. Just a faint tapping sound, distant and regular, somewhere beyond the walls. I didn't think much of it at first. I had trouble sleeping in those days, not for any particular reason, just one of those stretches of time where your body forgets how to rest and your mind wanders down too many hallways at once. The apartment was quiet then, the kind of quiet that makes you more aware of your own breathing, your own pulse in your ears. I'd lie in bed with the window cracked just slightly, letting the cool air drift in, hoping it would carry sleep with it. And that's when I began to notice it, a sound that didn't belong to my apartment, or to the wind, or to anything I could explain away with pipes or settling wood. It was footsteps, slow, steady, measured in a way that felt intentional. I live on the third floor of an old building where the walls are thick and the floors creak if you breathe too hard, so sound doesn't travel easily. But these footsteps didn't come from above or below. They came from the hallway, the one just outside my front door, always at the same time, just past 3 a.m. At first, I assumed it was someone getting home late. We've all had those nights drinks that run long, cigarettes smoked too slowly under flickering streetlights, but it wasn't that. It wasn't hurried or uneven. It wasn't tired. It was calm, almost rhythmic. Every few nights, I'd hear it just a few paces, no more than 5 or 6 steps, then silence again. No door closing, no elevator ding, just footsteps, as if someone had walked halfway down the hall and stopped. And something about it, even in its quiet simplicity, started to sit differently in me, not frightening, not threatening, but watchful, like someone walking not to go somewhere, but to remain. I never opened the door. Not out of fear, I wasn't scared exactly. I just felt like opening it would break something, that maybe the silence had rules, and the moment I stepped into it, the spell would vanish. So I stayed inside. I listened. I let the sound walk through me, and somewhere in that strange, still hour the world forgets, I began to wonder if I was the only one who heard it, or if someone, somewhere, might be listening too. The next time I heard the footsteps, I was already half awake. The way you are when sleep brushes past, but doesn't stay when the body stays still. But the mind has already begun to wander the edges of the dark. I hadn't heard them in nearly a week, and I remember thinking that maybe whatever it was, whoever it was, had moved on. Maybe it had just been a neighbor after all, and I'd let my sleeplessness turn something ordinary into something mysterious. But then they came again, just after 3 a.m. Like clockwork, though clocks never sound quite that gentle. I didn't sit up this time. I stayed lying down, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, and I just listened. The same sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps passing outside my door. But something about them was different. They paused longer between steps, not dramatically, just enough to make you notice. It was no longer the calm, even rhythm I'd heard before. Now, there was hesitation, a kind of quiet testing in the way the steps fell, like someone unsure of where they were going, or maybe unsure if they should keep going at all. I counted them. 7 steps this time, 2 more than usual. Then silence, as always. But this time, the silence felt less like an ending and more like a waiting. I don't know how long I lay there after the sound faded. Could have been minutes, could have been half an hour, but I didn't move. I just stayed with it. And what struck me wasn't fear. It wasn't even curiosity, really. It was empathy. That might sound strange, but it felt true. There was something about those footsteps that carried more than presence. They carried uncertainty, like someone walking a path they used to know well, only now it was unfamiliar. And in that way, I recognized something of myself in them. How many times had I wandered the hallways of my own mind in the middle of the night, looking for something I couldn't name? Maybe we were both awake at the same hour for a reason. Maybe silence has its own way of introducing us, not with names, not with faces, but with the simple act of staying. And so I stayed too. I let the mystery walk its quiet path. And I listened. I don't remember deciding to do it, not in any conscious, deliberate way. It was one of those choices that grows quietly over days, like a soft tide rising until you realize you're already standing in it. I'd begun to feel something each night as 3 a.m. approached, not anticipation exactly, and certainly not fear, but a kind of still readiness, like a breath held before a note is played. The footsteps didn't come every night, but often enough that I started adjusting my own rhythm. I began going to bed a little earlier, setting the kettle to boil just after midnight so I'd have something warm in my hands if I was still awake. And one night, without any real reason, without drama, I got up from bed, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and sat quietly on the floor by the door. Not pressed against it, not listening hard, just there, present. Like I was offering space or making myself available to something I didn't quite understand. The hallway was on the other side of a thin stretch of wood and air, and in that small distance, the world felt suspended. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the occasional pop of the building settling into itself, but mostly it was silence. And then, right on time, the footsteps returned. Slower this time, heavier almost, not tired, more like careful, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. 4 steps, then a pause, 2 more, and then something I hadn't heard before, a shift. Not movement away, not movement closer, just the faint sound of weight being redistributed, like whoever was out there had stopped directly in front of my door, not knocking, not breathing heavily, just there, like me. I didn't move, I didn't speak, but something in me softened, not out of understanding, but out of recognition. I don't know what they were carrying or why they walked that hallway in the stillest part of the night, but I knew what it felt like to have something unsettled inside you, something that asked for silence and space and rhythm, and maybe that was all this was. Not a haunting, not a warning, just 2 people awake at the same hour, keeping each other company without ever needing to meet. And in that moment, the space between us didn't feel empty. It felt shared. It was strange how quickly I'd grown used to it. The footsteps, the hour, the quiet rhythm of something unknown passing gently through the edges of my world. And so, when the sound didn't come one night, I felt it. Not like a sharp absence, not like panic, but more like reaching for a light switch in the dark and finding only wall. That night, I still sat by the door, wrapped in the same blanket, the steam from my tea curling toward the ceiling in slow spirals. The clock clicked past 3, then 3:03, then 3:10. Nothing. Just the normal silence of a building asleep. The hallway on the other side of the door felt still in a different way, not empty, but paused, like a stage waiting for its next scene. I listened harder than usual, but the quiet didn't give anything away. It just sat with me. And for a moment, I caught myself wondering if I had imagined it all, the footsteps, the rhythm, the strange sense of presence. It would have been easier, maybe, to believe I had. But no, my body remembered too well. That subtle shift in air, the weight of listening, the comfort in knowing something passed by, even if I didn't know why. I didn't stay long that night. I left the mug near the door and returned to bed. But sleep didn't come, not out of restlessness, but reflection. I thought about how easily we adapt to mystery, how something unknown can become part of us simply because it returns often enough. And I thought about how silence isn't always neutral. Sometimes it means something has ended, and sometimes it means something is simply changing. I didn't feel afraid, just quiet, thoughtful, like something was asking me to notice more deeply. So I did. I lay there in the dark, listening to a hallway that held no sound, and in that silence, I said, not out loud, but inwardly, "It's okay if you don't come tonight," and I meant it, because presence doesn't have to be constant to matter. Sometimes the space someone leaves behind is its own kind of companionship. In the days that followed, I stopped waiting for the footsteps, not because I no longer cared, and not because I'd stopped listening, but because something had shifted in me gently, without instruction. I began to realize it wasn't the sound itself that had settled into my nights, but what it had opened in me. The rhythm of it, soft, steady, without explanation, had become a kind of mirror, a way of recognizing how long it had been since I'd really felt accompanied, even in silence. And it struck me, slowly, how much we need things we don't always notice. A shape passing by our door, a sound that repeats just often enough to say, "You're not alone." It didn't matter anymore whether the footsteps returned. What mattered was how they had reached into the quiet corners of my routine and stirred something awake, not loudly, not dramatically, just gently. I found myself thinking about the kind of presence that asks for nothing, the kind that simply shows up. I'd been that kind of person once. Years ago, the friend who'd stay late just to sit beside someone who didn't want to talk, the one who'd leave the porch light on, even when they weren't expecting company. Somewhere along the way, I think I'd forgotten how powerful that kind of quiet could be. But the footsteps reminded me, or maybe they gave me permission to remember. And so, even without their return, I began to carry their rhythm into other parts of my life. I made tea at night without needing a reason. I sat by the window longer than I used to. I let myself listen more deeply to the creak of the floors, the hum of passing cars, the invisible sounds that come only when the world has gone still. I don't know if it was loneliness that first made the footsteps matter to me, or if it was something older, a part of me that longed for the kind of connection that doesn't need to be named. But whatever it was, it stayed. And in its absence, I didn't feel emptiness. I felt gratitude for having noticed, for having been quiet enough, for once, to receive something that didn't try to explain itself, just walked by, just left a shape in the dark, and then moved on. It had been nearly 2 weeks since I last heard them, and by then I had let go of expectation, not out of disappointment, but in the way you release something that has already given you what it came to give. I still kept my small routines. Tea around midnight, a book open but rarely read, a few quiet moments by the door or the window before bed. I no longer listened for the footsteps, but they came anyway. One night, just past 3, I was awake but not restless, lying in that calm, in-between state where thoughts don't press, they just drift. And then I heard it again, soft and slow, just like before. Footsteps. Not rushed, not delayed, 7 of them, paced evenly, but this time there was something different. A pause, longer than usual, right outside my door. The kind of pause that holds presence. And then a sound I hadn't heard before, not loud, not forceful, just the soft brush of something being placed on the floor. Then silence. Not footsteps continuing on, not a door opening or closing, just stillness. I waited, not daring to move, and in that long moment, I wasn't thinking about fear or answers. I wasn't even thinking at all. I was simply aware of myself, of the hallway beyond the door, of the strange warmth in my chest that felt something like recognition. Eventually, I stood, slowly, and padded barefoot to the door, my hand resting on the knob but not turning it. I just stood there, breathing in the space between. It felt like standing at the edge of something I wasn't meant to cross, not because I wasn't allowed, but because crossing it might undo the meaning of what had been shared in silence. And somehow, that felt sacred. So I didn't open the door, not right away. I let the night settle back into itself, let the quiet speak in its own language, and when I finally opened it, gently, slowly, there was nothing there. No figure, no sound, just a folded piece of paper on the floor, resting against the frame. My heart didn't race, it softened. I picked it up with careful fingers and brought it inside. On the outside, no name, just one sentence, written in neat, careful handwriting, "I remember you." And in that moment, something deep inside me shifted not into clarity, but into peace. Because whatever this was, it had reached me, not through answers, but through presence. And sometimes that's all we need, to be remembered, to be known, even by someone who never needed to say your name. I kept the note by my bedside for days without reading it again, even though the words were burned into me, just 3 of them. I remember you. There was something in the way they were written, steady and clean, without flourish or hesitation, that made them feel heavier than they looked. Not ominous, not dramatic, just real, real in a way that made something old stir quietly in me, like dust lifting from a shelf that hadn't been touched in years. I couldn't say what it meant. Not exactly. But the sentence didn't feel random. It felt placed. Like someone reaching backward through time, through silence, through layers of forgotten moments and saying, "You existed. You mattered. I saw you once." And maybe it wasn't even about me, specifically. Maybe it was about something I'd once been a version of myself I'd quietly set down and never picked back up. I started thinking about times in my life I thought no one had noticed me. The hospital hallway where I sat alone when my grandfather passed, the rainy bus stop I waited at when I didn't have the words to tell anyone what I was feeling, the rooftop I used to climb when I was younger, just to sit where no one could hear me. And I wondered, could someone have seen me then? Not spoken, not interrupted, just remembered. The idea made my throat tighten, not from sadness, but from the quiet weight of being witnessed. I think most people don't need to be understood fully. They just need to believe that someone, somewhere, carries a piece of them gently in memory, that they haven't disappeared completely from the world. And this note, small as it was, felt like that kind of remembrance. I didn't need to know who had written it. I didn't need to solve the story. I only needed to feel what I already did, that something had reached out to me in the night and reminded me, without asking anything in return, that I wasn't forgotten, and that remembering that whisper of a connection stretched across time or space or simple human noticing was enough to make me feel whole, just for a while. I never heard the footsteps again after that night, not once. The hallway returned to its usual silence, soft and forgettable, like the world had tucked itself back into routine. The note stayed on my nightstand for a while, then in a drawer, then eventually inside the pages of a book I never finished reading, not to forget it, but to give it a place to rest. I never figured out who left it. No one in the building moved away. No one asked questions. No one said anything that felt like a clue. And still, something in me knew the moment had passed exactly the way it was meant to, not loudly, not with answers, but with meaning, quiet, offered, and complete. The strange thing is, I never really expected resolution. Not once did I think I'd open the door and find someone standing there. This story, whatever it was, didn't belong to conclusion. It belonged to presence, to attention, to the soft rhythm of noticing something that didn't have to be explained to matter. I still think about it, sometimes. When I'm up late with the windows open and the world feels thin, I still find myself pausing when I walk past my own door, remembering how it felt to sit beside it in the dark, waiting for something I didn't know I was missing. And maybe that's what the footsteps gave me. In the end, not a story to retell, but a quiet invitation to listen more carefully, to be still enough to feel what the silence is saying. I don't think the person who walked those halls was trying to be found. I think they were offering something, a rhythm, a reminder, a small echo in the night that says, "You're not as alone as you think." And in a way I still don't fully understand, that changed me. It didn't solve anything. It just softened everything. And sometimes that's the better gift. Not certainty, just connection. Just a little peace placed gently at your door, in the form of footsteps that came and went and left something behind that still lingers, quiet and kind.